Joined by Christie, our ABC News contributor, former governor of New Jersey, Democraticist and former DNC chair Donna Brazile, Megan Murphy, the former editor of Bloomberg Businessweek, another the former New Orleans mayor Mitch Landrieu, Democrat from Louisiana, and Alice Stewart, Republican strategist, CNN political commentator. Now, Donna, I want to begin with you because you were telling me a story before we went on the air. Your first encounter with John McCain more than 35 years ago.
I was a young congressional staffer working with one of our home state heroes, Lindy Boggs, and I was charged with the task of lobbying for the King holiday. And when I went up to this young congressman, he said, "We're not ready." And I said, "What do you mean? We have over 300 votes." He said, "But my state." And fast forward 25 years later, George, John McCain called and said he was going to Memphis to say he was wrong. In those intervening years, not only did he lobby his state, but John McCain was a man of his word who said, "I would continue this campaign, this march." And he admitted that he was wrong. And for me, as a woman of color, I would be honored if the Russell Building was renamed after John McCain. Not only for his legacy, his service, he kept his word. But when John McCain saw his grandson named after himself, he was so proud, and he put it on Twitter. His grandson, who carries his name, is an African-American as well. He was a great man.
And Mayor Landrieu, that tracks with the story John Carl was telling us earlier about something John McCain regretted coming out against on the Confederate issue in South Carolina. This issue of race was something that struck to his core as well.
Yeah, he got popped both ways, though. You remember when he was running, you know, they really kind of tried to kill him in South Carolina because they said he had a black child, and they tried to create the issue of race. The South was really torn apart by race for such a long time. It's important for us to heal the country around that issue. As I've said many times, and Donna is a great champion, you can't go around this issue. You have to go through it. And the country, quite frankly, has not gone through it the way we should.
You remind me right there. I had forgotten just how vicious that campaign got.
Yeah, you remember the South Carolina primary, where the way they took him down was on the issue of race because he had a black child, as though that had something to do with whether he was going to be a great senator or not. And so it continues to be an issue that this country has to go through. We have to listen to each other. We have to be open and up. And I just always think we're better together. And better together is a continuing theme in John McCain's life. Also a great friend.
Well, and listen, that's a story I could tell, George. 2 days after Bridgegate broke in January of 2014 for me, and I was under siege, I got a call from John McCain. And he said to me, "Listen, I got one question for you." He said, "Did you have anything to do with this?" And I said, "I didn't, Senator." And he said, "Good." He goes, "Well, then you're getting killed out there." He goes, "Tell your people to put me on as many TV shows as I can. I'm going to stand up for you." And for weeks after that, he was one of the only voices on television saying, "I know Chris Christie. I know his character. I know he didn't have anything to do with this." And I didn't call him, he called me, George. As you know, very few friends like that in politics, and he's an amazing person.
Alice Stewart, he could be all over the map politically. We showed him working with Democrats there in those clips. Also, many times just went down the line, Republican orthodoxy as well, but could rankle the party.
Oh, sure. He was fearless. He was a fighter. Heaven has a new hero this morning, and that is something we all remember him as, someone who stood his ground. Certainly when he was a POW, he had the opportunity to get in the front of the line. He said, "No, the right thing to do is for me to stay back." He did not break rank, and he did that in politics. But I also remember him as someone with a wonderful sense of humor. During the 08 campaign, I remember going back in the green rooms, in the debates, he would go in Governor Huckabee's green rooms and practice his jokes and kind of use us as a sounding board. And we won't say any names, but there was one person that was generally the subject of a lot of his jokes. And Governor Huckabee would soften him a little bit and walk it back. And generally, Senator McCain would take his advice. I don't want to be too rough on someone, but he always got in a good punchline.
Yeah, some things never change.
Some things don't change. Yeah. Well, you're talking about punches, talking about political campaigns. We can't ignore this fractious relationship that he has had with President Trump over the last year and a half, going back to the campaign where President Trump simply said, "Listen, I don't respect him as a war hero. He was captured."
You know, probably one of the low points of the Trump administration in general was that comment and the campaign. And I think I want to go back to what Donna and Mitch were saying. The moment I remember most about John McCain was his 2008 concession speech.
Oh, yes.
And when he got on that stage and he pointed to the particular significance of an African-American man winning that race for the African-American community and what it meant for America, and that this was the very best of America. This example was the very best, what America was all about. And when I think about that and the level of discourse and how far we've sunk right there, inflaming racial tensions that we have in this country, and what I hope with his legacy is that it will not be just words and it won't be just platitudes, but that we will all look inside of ourselves to say, how do we be more decent? How do we have more compassion? How do we respect human dignity? Because that is what he was about.
I think it's a tall order.
Yeah, and listen, I'd say to you that as somebody who was in the race at that time when the now president made that comment, to me, that was the moment of demarcation when politics changed in this country, because I could tell you all of us thought, this is over. He said that about John McCain. He's going to have to get out of the race. And we were all kind of preparing ourselves. And it was not just me, but I spoke to Marco about this and Jeb. We all were preparing, like, okay, how's the race going to be different with Trump out of it? And the fact that that didn't end the race, that was a real change.
I'm glad you said that, because listen, we've all been wrong about a lot of things over the last couple of years. But I vividly remember that moment as well, saying, how is it possible that someone can survive attacking an American war hero like that? Yet he did.
He did. And you know, to John McCain's credit, he never lowered himself to respond. He kept moving.
Yeah.
Even after the pettiness of the last couple of weeks with the defense authorization bill, he never lowered himself to respond.
You're talking about the moment where President Trump signed it but didn't mention his name.
He did not mention his name. Here, a lawmaker, the chair of the Defense Committee, and Armed Services, he worked his way up because he cared about veterans, because he cared about America. Yes, he was a hawk. We had a lot of disagreements, but he was a man who cared about his country. John McCain put his country first.
But isn't it worth taking a moment for the entire country to see what it looks like to put country first? Nobody could ever accuse John McCain of being weak or soft or not tough or not petulant from time to time, but he was also a bipartisan. He was also kind. He also governed with great dignity and great strength. Isn't that a good model for us going forward? And if his life is not going to be in vain, America maybe ought to take a moment and think about what that looks like for all of us that are in office.
It's an important point. You know, you tend to lionize people in the moment of their death, but you know, this is a man who is definitely not a saint. You talk about his sense of humor. He also had a fierce temper. He could be petty as well, but he found ways around it.
Certainly, and he found ways to work across the aisle and get things done. And of all the responses we've heard over the last 12 hours since his passing, the presidential response is one that stands out as touching and endearing, of course, from President Obama, and talking about how he and Senator McCain disagreed politically on many things, yet they came together on issues that were very important. Fidelity to doing what is best for our country and doing the right thing, regardless of the consequences, but understanding we have political differences, but that doesn't mean we cannot work together for the best of this country.
A lot else happened this week. Of course, we were talking earlier about that day Tuesday, those the guilty plea by Michael Cohen, the convictions of Paul Manafort. I mean, Megan, one of the big questions I was thinking about as we saw that unfold on Tuesday afternoon, is this a tipping point?
We've said so many times before of what a tipping point is. I think one thing that's different now is we were talking about saying this is another bad week, the worst week yet for the administration. No, this is one of the worst weeks for the country. And here's why. It's twofold. One, you have the mess of Michael Cohen, of a circle closing in on the president, as it appears, to be sure. But also, when he gets in these situations where he feels the noose is tightening, where he feels things are closing in, he has shown to act irrationally, to back into a corner, to appeal to the worst instincts of his base, whether that's pandering on athletes, taking kneeling during the national anthem, whether that's immigration. That is how he reacts. He retreats into a corner, and he does things that can be dangerous for this country. I don't think this is going to be the worst week of the administration. I think we have many more worse weeks to come. Whether this is the tipping point, what Bob Mueller has, what the New York Southern District has, will yet to be seen. But this is just another horrible week.
Hey, Christie, you're a former prosecutor as well, and I want to play a little bit of the president's reaction and then get your response. This was the president on Fox and Friends talking about Paul Manafort.
And one of the reasons I respect Paul Manafort so much is he went through that trial. You know, they make up stories. People make up stories. This whole thing about flipping, they call it. I know all about flipping. For 30, 40 years, I've been watching flippers. Everything's wonderful, and then they get 10 years in jail, and they flip on whoever the next highest one is, or as high as you can go. It almost ought to be outlawed.
As a prosecutor, I'm sure you flipped more than a few,
Yes, I did.
More than a few witnesses, and I wonder if that is picking up on Megan's point. You look at the Southern District right now. They had a cooperating witness in the president's chief financial officer. They had a cooperating witness in his good friend David Pecker over at the National Enquirer. They are reaching deep inside the Trump world.
Sure. Well, and you know, we don't know what they're cooperating on, obviously, George. We know how limited or broad the immunity they were given was. Now, there were lots of times when I was a prosecutor that we would give someone a narrow piece of immunity to get a particular piece of information, and their lawyers would demand that. We'd give it to them. Sometimes you give a much broader immunity, and they're cooperating on a whole variety of issues. We won't know. And I think that one of the things that the president fundamentally misunderstands in that comment that he made is that responsible prosecutors, which I considered myself to be one, you don't just listen to someone who flips, you corroborate them. You have to bring in other evidence because obviously that person has told different stories at different times. You can't just go in with that witness. You have to go in with corroborating evidence, documents, other witnesses that can back up that story. And if you don't, then you shouldn't bring charges against someone just based on one person's word against another. That's the way our system is supposed to work. It would be wrong to outlaw that, but we have to make sure our prosecutors act responsibly and get corroborating evidence. And that may be what the Southern District's trying to do. We don't know. We're going to find out over time.
Donna Brazile, in that interview, the president talked about impeachment. We just saw Congressman Swalwell not want to touch the word with a 10-foot pole. Democrats think it's actually going to hurt them in the midterm election.
You know, Republicans are talking more about it than Democrats on the campaign trail. Democrats are talking about pocketbook issues. We know that the American people want an alternative to the status quo right now. Look, I want to say something about, you know, the president. The president is throwing a lot of shade. That's what the kids call it. I mean, shade on the attorney general. He's throwing shade on the investigation. It is time the president understand that he has to defend the Constitution. He's not above the rule of law. When you're an accountant, when you're a former attorney, and the keeper of secrets are all cooperating with the government, the president should show some respect to the process.
And Mayor Landrieu, how do Democrats balance this out? I mean, I understand the concern about appearing like you're overreaching, yet these are potentially serious crimes being discussed.
Well, I think when Michael Cohen did what he did, it took it into a more urgent piece. But I think the lawyers have to do what they have to do. In a democracy, impeachment is always the last resort. The way we change power in this country is through elections. So my admonition to Democrats is to go out and vote so that you can win. It's pretty clear that Congress has been feckless and completely weak in terms of pushing back this president who is obviously out of bounds. And the way to do that is at the election box immediately. Let the prosecutors do what they do. And as Governor Christie said, a thorough and complete investigation. Bob Mueller is a respected prosecutor across the aisle. Let them do their work and then let the facts and the law take us where it will.
What does all this mean for Republicans in the midterms?
The key is motivating them, getting them out to vote. And clearly what we're seeing from the president and others out there, dropping the hint of possible impeachment to encourage Republicans to get out there and vote and make sure that we can secure the House on the Republican side so Democrats don't come in and talk about impeachment. What I'm hearing talking across the country, people are focused on jobs and the economy. Trump's base is there. All of this Manafort and Cohen and even Pecker, this is talk. They don't see it sticking with the president right now. They say that he hasn't done anything wrong. I disagree. I think payoff to porn stars is wrong. But the questionable, the real word that hits a buzzword with a lot of voters is parole. If he starts pardons, if he starts issuing pardons or talking about pardons, that is where his base is going to turn. They have a problem
They could turn on that. It turns out, and this is a point you were getting at, Megan, earlier, even firing Rod Rosenstein or the Attorney General at this point is not going to stop all these other investigations. New York Attorney General, U.S. Attorney in the Southern District, the District Attorney here in Manhattan.
And we don't know which one is most dangerous. We don't know what Bob Mueller has. We don't know where they're at with that investigation. Exactly as you're saying, we don't know what they're actually corroborating on. But I think you make a really important point. The one thing we also don't know is this motivating his base? Is this actually causing more people to want to turn out in the midterms? Democrats have a huge sway behind them of people who hate this presidency, who are so motivated by that. But as you're saying, it's pocketbook issues, it's health care, it's are my wages going to go up? And I think Democrats are making a smart play, too, by focusing on companies and greed and inequality still in this country.
Culture of corruption. Chris, is there anything the president can do right now to get ahead of this, or is it just got to wait it out?
No, I think, and I've given this advice all along, is that there's an investigation like this, there's no way you can make it shorter, but there's lots of ways you can make it longer. And the way you make it longer is keep talking. Just stop talking. Just stop.
That is the one piece of advice he's not going to take.
No, and I'm going to
Tweet
continue to give it because it's the right advice. And I'll tell you this, when we talk about Michael Cohen too, and I would just say that as a prosecutor, I look at him as a potential witness. And if I were the folks in the Southern District of New York or Bob Mueller, and we're working with Michael Cohen, I'd want to get a boatload of corroboration for this guy, because let's not forget, we all talk about the 2 counts that he pled to as the campaign finance. Those 6 other counts that he pled to show this is a guy who was a liar, a cheater, and a thief. And so if you're going to, listen, I put liars and cheaters and thieves on the stand too, but I've had a boatload of corroboration for him.
It appears that is what they were developing. That's all we have time for today. Thank you all very much. Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.